Thank you, everyone, for coming today. It's great to see a great turnout, and I know we have several people online as well. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Jenny Town. I'm a senior fellow here at the Stimson Center and director of 38 North in our Korea program. We're here to talk about a really important issue in North Korea that is actually a situation that's actually getting worse over time, and to talk about sort of those dynamics and the challenges and how we might move forward on that. I think it's widely known that North Korea maintains strict information controls inside the country, with the state controlling all domestic media sources and banning consumption of outside info. There are always, of course, some exceptions to this rule, especially regarding select entertainment from friendly countries. But for the most part, North Korean government narratives are shaping what the people know and trying to shape the way they think about their country, their leader, and their place in society. There have been many attempts over the years to try and provide the North Korean people access to outside information through radio and TV broadcasting and clandestine information operations. Some have been successful, but how to get information into the state is becoming more challenging, with more frequent crackdowns, stricter border controls, higher punishments for consumption, and even the adoption of more and more surveillance and data collection technologies. So we have an incredible panel today to discuss this changing landscape and of North Korean information controls, but also why continued efforts are important, who is being reached, and what impact it has had on their lives. So on today's panel, on my left is Martin Williams, my colleague here at 38 North. He's a former tech reporter and one of the leading experts on North Korea's digital landscape for the past 20 years. He's the lead of our newest initiative, North Korea Tech Lab, that's investigating the ins and outs of North Korea's evolving technology environment. He's also the author of the North Korea Tech blog and of numerous reports on North Korea's cell phones and digital surveillance capabilities. Kyuri Kang escaped North Korea in 2023 with her mother and aunt, one of the rare groups to successfully flee while the borders were still under the strict pandemic lockdowns. She was born in Pyongyang, but banished to a remote coastal province where she eventually became a ship owner and started a small fishing business to support her family. And she'll be sharing her story about the role accessing forbidden outside information played in her decision to escape. Rohit Mahajan is Radio Free Asia's Chief Communications Officer, leading the company's media and congressional relations. He'll share with us some of the results of various impact surveys RFA has done over the years to test and to measure the impact of foreign radio broadcasting into North Korea. And finally, Hannah Oh, who escaped from North Korea in 2018 from Haeryong. After resettling in South Korea, she studies electrical engineering at Hongik University, and she's part of Link's Changemaker Scholarship Program, where she's working on developing devices and strategies for helping increase information access for people inside North Korea. So truly a fascinating panel. I look forward to the discussion. Just for your information, both Kyuri and Hannah will present in Korean, but we'll have their slides. On the slides will be the translations, the subtitles. So if you can't see the screens, you might want to make sure you're sitting in a place where you can see the screens. Each speaker will present for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move to questions from the audience. If you're on Zoom, feel free to use the Q&A function. Online, there's instructions on how to submit questions, and we'll try and pepper them all in, as well as the questions, of course, in the room as we go along. And with that, I will hand it over to Martin.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And again, thank you all for coming here today. The image that we used to promote this event online when we sent out the invitations was a picture of people in a Pyongyang metro station looking at the newspaper pinned up in one of the display panels. Those things still exist today, but they've also been supplemented now with new touchscreen digital displays that allow people to sort of scroll through and provide a much more immersive experience than simply looking at some newspaper pinned up on the wall. The kiosks, along with things like smartphones and websites, are new tools that the North Korean state is using to deliver its propaganda to the people. I believe that one of the reasons that it's turning to these new tools is because of the success of foreign information that's going into the country. The state is being forced to innovate in the way it gets its message across to people because it needs to keep up with the more engaging and more modern and, frankly, more interesting content that's coming in from overseas. But while the state's new methods are new for sending this, for getting this information to the people, the information that they're getting, the underlying information, is not. It's the same propaganda wrapped up in new technology, or as the saying goes, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. The Workers' Party still controls all of the domestic media in North Korea through the Propaganda and Agitation Department. It controls what's reported, how it's reported, and when it's reported. Every media outlet in North Korea reports the same message, ensuring that there are absolutely no inconsistencies in what people hear. And that's where foreign information makes a big, big difference, because it comes from multiple sources, it carries multiple messages, and exposes North Koreans to news, entertainment, and ideas that they otherwise would have absolutely no access to. It comes mainly in two forms. First, there's a lot of video content that's smuggled across the border on USBs and memory cards. These can carry huge amounts of information in a very small form factor, especially dramas, movies, documentaries. But they come with some risks. Smugglers have to risk their lives, risk imprisonment to get them across the border. It can be expensive, and those caught with them can face severe punishment. The other main way that information gets into the country is through broadcast television and radio. That flows effortlessly across the airwaves. It's far less risky. Reception of TV and radio broadcasts leaves no trace. Unless someone is caught in the act of listening, it's very difficult to prove that they listened or consumed information. Broadcast is also the only way that you can reach the entirety of the North Korean nation simultaneously. And that's why the most recent suspension of broadcasting going into the country is so troubling. For decades, Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, who Rohit works for, transmitted on shortwave and medium wave. Medium wave especially, those broadcasts were one of the strongest nighttime radio signals on the Korean peninsula and could be easily heard across the entire nation. After that, South Korea's government also took 5 of its radio stations off the air. There are now just a few private broadcasters that remain. There's a radio service from KBS, and there's a very short broadcast from the BBC World Service. But together, the broadcasts that remain represent just a fraction of what used to go into North Korea. According to data that we compiled, the total number of daily broadcast hours, so this is the number of hours of programming on the air from all of the radio stations across multiple frequencies, has dropped by 85% since the beginning of this year. The cuts have also silenced all television broadcasting into North Korea. There is now no way that North Koreans can receive TV signals from outside of the country. And as we're hopefully going to hear shortly from some of our guests here today, TV and radio are uniquely powerful. They show North Koreans what South Korea, the US, and what the rest of the world really looks like. The TV programs carry entertainment, education, news, and drama, the kinds of things that North Koreans would otherwise not get access to. But now all of that has been silenced by the cuts. For many North Koreans, these broadcasts were the only unfiltered window on the world. They didn't carry just information, but they carried possibility. Today, there is substantially less access to foreign media, and the US and the South Korea have lost vital tools in the way that they can reach the North Korean people. These tools were not only used to share ideas, but also to speak directly to North Korean citizens in real time. And that is really one of the big benefits of broadcast, the ability to reach people in real time. Should there ever be any type of contingency or emergency on the Korean peninsula, there's now no way that the US or the South Koreans can speak to the North Korean people. And that's why I believe that the cuts that have happened in the last few months have handed Kim Jong-un a major victory in his campaign against outside information. He's been trying for years to block these broadcasts, and in a few months, the US and the South Korean governments have done that work for him. It's going to be hard to reverse the damage that has been done by these. even if radio and television comes back on the air after a break of so many months, a lot of people will have given up looking for it and given up trying to listen to it. And it will take a long time for these broadcasts to build back up the audience that they've now lost. So unfortunately, the longer the silence continues, the worse that it's going to get. I hope that soon, some of these broadcasts will resume, because I think it's doing a great damage to the access that North Koreans have to information, but also to the interests of the US and the South Korean governments as well. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and look forward to some questions.
Great, thanks, Martin. Next, we'll have Curie.
어쩌면 여러분은 제 이름을 알 수도, 제 얼굴을 볼 수도, 제 이야기를 들을 수도 없었을 겁니다. 왜냐하면 저는 북한 안에 숨겨진 2,600만 명 중 한 사람이었으니까요. 저는 2001년 평양에서 태어났습니다. 북한 정부가 제 동의 없이 처음으로 제 미래를 결정했을 때 저는 아직 어린 아이였어요. 우리 가족은 함경남도의 한 어촌 마을로 추방을 당했습니다. 할머니가 종교를 믿는다는 이유로 처벌을 받은 거예요. 학교에서는 우리는 세상에서 가장 존엄한 나라에서 살고 있다라고 배웠지만 교실 밖에서는 사람들이 굶주림에 쓰러지고 있었죠. 이웃 귀에 들어간 말 한마디가 밤중에 버이원의 문 두드림으로 돌아올 수도 있었습니다. 북한 정부가 사람들을 통제하는 방식은 바로 생존이 복종에 달려있다고 믿게 만드는 것이었습니다. 성인이 되어 다시 저는 평양으로 돌아왔습니다. 저는 평양체육대학에서 탁구를 전공하면서 재능과 노력으로 새로운 삶을 만들어 가리라 꿈꿨습니다. 하지만 현실은 전혀 달랐어요. 결국 모든 것은 얼마나 열심히 노력했는지가 아니라 얼마나 더 복종했느냐에 따라 결정된다는 쓰라린 진실을 알게 되었습니다. 어머니와 이모님을 돕고자 바닷가에 가서 제 힘으로 삶을 개척하려 했습니다. 어머니는 평생 힘들게 모은 재산을 모두 보태 저에게 작은 나무배를 마련해 주셨고 저는 그 배로 조개 채취 사업을 시작할 수 있었습니다. 그 배는 단순히 생계수단이 아니었어요. 어머니의 희생과 저에 대한 신뢰 그리고 그동안의 모든 사랑이 담겨있던 증거였습니다. 그런데 열심히 일하면 일할수록 더 많은 간부들이 저를 찾아왔습니다. 그들은 조개뿐만 아니라 저에게 돈까지 요구했어요. 그 상황에서 저는 사람들을 지키고 사업을 계속 이어나가기 위해 밤마다 고민했습니다. 현실에서 벗어나기 위해 밤에는 중국에서 밀수된 TV로 몰래 한국 드라마도 시청했습니다. 그 경험은 제 세상을 완전히 뒤흔들었어요. 제가 아는 두 청년은 외부 영상을 시청했다는 이유만으로도 공개 처형을 당했습니다. 하지만 아무리 억압해도 저 같은 젊은이들을 현실을 잊기 위해 계속 북한 정부가 금지하는 외국 방송을 시청했습니다. 수십 년 동안 외부 정보는 북한에 은밀히 흘러나왔습니다. 많은 탈북민들이 저처럼 드라마의 특정 장면이나 한국 노래 한 곡, 심지어 옷차림과 말투, 교통방송까지도 체제 문화에 의문을 품게 만든 계기였다고 말합니다. 그러면 저희는 생각하게 돼요. 밖의 삶이 저렇게 다른데 왜 여기만 이래야지? 정보라는 건 일단 알게 되면 다시 모를 수가 없습니다. 저는 진실을 본 순간 다시 예전으로 돌아갈 수도 없었습니다. 북한을 떠난다는 건 단순히 떠난다라는 말로는 설명할 수 없는 일이에요. 특히 저처럼 어머니와 이모와 함께 탈출한 경우에는 더 그렇습니다. 탈출을 감행한 날 밤 우리는 배에 올라 어둠 속 바다로 나아갔습니다. 저는 키를 잡고 물살에 몸을 맡긴 채 초소와 순찰선을 피해 조심스럽게 남쪽으로 향했어요. 체포, 끝없는 신문, 모욕, 공개재판, 정치범 수용소, 그리고 사랑하는 가족을 잃을 수 있다는 것까지도 저는 사랑하는 가족을 잃을 수 있다는 것까지도 알았습니다. 그러던 중 경비정이 나타났습니다. 눈부신 탐조등이 바다를 가르며 점점 가까워졌습니다. 그들이 우리를 향해 오고 있었죠. 잡히면 차라리 스스로 목숨을 끊겠다고 결심했어요. 하지만 저는 거부했습니다. 갑자기 경비정이 멈추더니 방향을 돌렸습니다. 우리가 이미 해양 경계선을 넘어선 거였죠. 해가 떠오르자 육지에 윤곽이 보였어요. 그는 우리에게 다가와 말했습니다. 환영합니다. 이젠 안전합니다. 우리가 한국에 도착한 지 거의 2년이 지났습니다. 그날 한국에 도착한 날 어머니와 이모와 번갈아 가며 샤워를 하며 웃고 말했어요. 이게 바로 사람 사는 거구나. 인생에서 처음으로 공부, 직업, 옷, 취미, 심지어 말투까지도 제 스스로 선택할 수 있었습니다. 마치 완전히 새로운 세상이 열린 것 같았어요. 저도 최근엔 열심히 공부해 이화 여자대학교에 합격했습니다. 북한 일권 활동에도 참여하고 한국에서 새로운 삶을 시작하는 모습을 세상에 알리기 위해 유튜브 채널도 운영하고 있습니다. 희망은 북한 정부에게 위협적인 존재입니다. 하지만 삶이 달라질 수도 있다는 걸 깨닫는 순간 희망이 싹트기 시작합니다. 희망이 생기면 변화는 더 이상 상상 속 일이 아니게 됩니다. 제 꿈은 언젠가 북한 청년들이 스스로 자신의 길을 선택하고 말 한마디로 처벌받지 않으며 모든 사람이 자신의 삶을 진정한 주인으로 살아가는 것이 되는 것입니다. 북한의 현실은 여전히 어둡지만 변화는 이미 시작되었습니다. 그리고 그 변화를 일으키는 불씨는 바로 정보입니다. 그래서 저는 제 이야기를 전합니다. 제가 말하지 않는다면 누가 대신해서 말해줄 수 있을까요? 지금 이 순간 북한 어딘가에서도 저와 같은 누군가가 어두운 방에서 몰래 한국 방송을 보며 속삭일 겁니다. 나도 저렇게 살 수 있을까? 북한의 미래는 아직 정해지지 않았습니다. 하지만 이야기가 퍼지고 생명이 구해지고 정보가 국경을 넘어갈 때마다 그 미래는 점점 더 가까워집니다. Freedom is not given, but it is something we can achieve. And with your support, we can write the future where all North Korean people are free. Thank you.
Thank you, Curie, for sharing your story. It's one that I think we've heard many versions of this over the years from different defectors as to really emphasizing the importance to continue trying to get information into North Korea. And congratulations on getting accepted to Ewha Women's University. We hope you have a bright future there. Next, we'd like to turn to Rohit.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much to Stimson for hosting this event and Jenny and Martin for inviting me to be part of it. I'm from Radio Free Asia. You know, I'm not a journalist. I'm on the other side, on the administrative side. I'm going to present some research today. But first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about the state of play with Radio Free Asia. You might have seen some of the headlines and news stories about how we are facing some pressure and some issues right now since March, when the administration terminated our grant agreement. We found ourselves in this push and pull where we had to go to the courts to access our funding. In the meantime, with this uncertainty of funding coming our way, we've had to take a lot of steps to preserve, protect our organization, and that, as a result, has led to, right now, 90% of our staff is either furloughed, and I mean unpaid leave, or they've taken new jobs, or they have chosen to resign to access some severance and such. And one of the casualties is our Korean service. So this is, a very serious situation, because what's at stake, really is not just an awesome news organization. I'll get to some of the highlights of the Korean service just briefly. But before I do that, it's kind of the unique way we work. And it's very different than, say, Voice of America or other broadcasters that you might have heard about. In that we have this model, it's an awkward term called surrogate journalism, but it means that we go into some of the most difficult media environments in the world, obviously North Korea being the most difficult, and are able to ferret out information on the ground through networks of people who are there. Sources based on the trust, based on some sort of belief in wanting to volunteer and put forward information that they know won't be shared on state-controlled media within their countries, because they know that this is a resource for them. And these connections, what's at stake here is not losing just, again, this awesome network, which has a slender budget and everything, but really losing those connections. And who benefits from those connections are obviously the people of North Korea and other repressive places. For example, Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are, the Tibetan regions of China, for a long time Burma. These are all super challenging media environments, and they're hard to break through. And really what leads to that success is that kind of two-way street by which we operate. So that's something we lose. And the other part of the equation who benefits from this, of course, are reporters and our journalists who really bravely and nimbly work on this, putting their lives at stake, putting the lives of their friends and family, especially if they're outside of their countries. There's this kind of exile journalism, but then they have folks who are ties that remain within those places. You might have heard about the Uyghur journalists, for example, famously from Radio Free Asia, who really broke and first informed the world about what's happening in Xinjiang. They led the first Trump administration to declare a genocide after we helped build that public record initially. They paid a huge price. Their families were persecuted, rounded up, put into camps. We've had similar reports about people who access our information, particularly from North Korea. So this is kind of a really bad situation that we're in, because it is, as going back to what Martin said, an important source of information. To quote Leonard Cohen, a crack by which the light can get in. And that is something that we have worked through and developed, and it's not just something that just gets spun up in a newsroom or something from Washington. It takes time, and it's almost generational at this point. So some of the stories that have broken, through our North Korean service, you might have heard about the Squid Game. There was a USB debacle where somebody who was selling or distributing the Squid Game series that was on Netflix was caught and executed. This was a few years ago. We've also broken stories about the ramp up of some of the military bases and such in the Korean border, North Korean border, and about the nuclear sites using satellite imagery. I know that 38 North has pioneered a lot of that work too. But that's also a way that we are able to get information out of a place that's entirely closed. And this has really come under a lot of pressure since the time of COVID, when the borders really were closed. So I'm going to get a little bit to the research that we were able to do. And another casualty, I should say, about the situation that our organization is in, Radio Free Asia, that is that we have this crack research team, which really drills down on an array of exciting and important projects that basically inform the work that we do. We look at places like those remote regions, of course, North Korea. And this research has been, through 20 years, working with a small team that we've been able to train to get interesting perspectives, out of people who are, and these are escapees or refugees, not necessarily in South Korea, but other places. And we are incredibly guarded about this type of work because it's incredibly difficult to do. But it gives us, as I said, a lot of insights about the way we do our work and the product, how people relate to it, and it also gives us a chance to kind of level set, what is the what, which is the biggest question when it comes to North Korea, the most closed place in the world. So one of the, we get into topics that Martin mentioned as well, with the kind of the view from the ground about views on unification, what life is like, about the side hustles and markets and things like that, and the black market and the state of those places, how border restrictions have impacted that. But we also drill down on media usage. And this is very telling because one important way is like looking and measuring how respondents access outside broadcasts, how they access foreign media, what they find interesting, and other things. So one of the things that we saw in this particular survey, this was done last year, and it started coming out at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, we started distributing it internally through memos, is that video is really king. And this is taking a group of 100 North Korean escapees who fled between January 2020 and October 23, using both quantitative data and in-depth interviews to provide some nuanced insights into their experiences. The majority of this group had left in 2023. The demographic skewed towards women. I think it was like 55 or 56% women, 44, 45% men. All ages, with a concentration of the middle age range. And there's a diversity in educational background, occupation, and that sort of thing. So it was people from like all walks of life from North Korea. And we saw that, the reasons for them leaving, by the way, like the top reason was reuniting with family in the South. But a close second and third was escaping oppression and also economic hardship. Really brought on that were exacerbated from COVID, when we saw a lot of the economy inside, this kind of secondary black market economy dry up or become much more difficult to conduct. So the big takeaway from this, and this slide kind of shows this, is the video was king. 100% of the survey group had watched pre-recorded outside videos, versus 40% who had accessed outside radio. And I should mention that this survey is not representative. If our research team was here, Shireen Arsalan, who really kind of led this project, would probably be reminding that caveat. But it is very telling. USB drives, popular, that was the most popular means by sharing outside content, particularly during COVID lockdowns when students use those more increasingly in North Korea to exchange information and to have lessons and all sorts of, for other purposes. But the cheap Chinese-made no-tell devices were also very principled, and those are video players that have USB and SD ports. Ports, cards being very popular with younger North Koreans. And they can also play DVDs, which were kind of seen as like old school, and Blu-rays. Younger respondents also use these devices to play games. So, you have this pie chart that I have up here, and it just shows kind of like the frequency by which these respondents accessed, and the biggest portion being daily, which was really surprising. These things kind of correspond to previous surveys we had done, but not to this degree. As to the daily access, usually weekly was the most. They're not that despondent or different. 91% access South Korean dramas and TV and film, which is not surprising. Close to 90% though was Chinese films, and 45% was foreign. Foreign meaning like American, European, but typically American. So the next slide, I want to get to that. And this is kind of interesting because we also drill down. The purpose of these surveys really is to understand media use, but we also, of course, want to know how people are interfacing with our content. And we were able to get a pool, in this pretty much from all of the provinces, all 9 provinces of North Korea, including Pyongyang. But we saw in the reports about radio usage, it was really the border regions where, on the Chinese border and the South Korean border, principally where these were being taken up. Interestingly, this quote that I pulled here as I compared the content of the broadcast with the reality of North Korea, my trust in the reporting deepened, is really kind of like an interesting kind of, bright light moment of Radio Free Asia, kind of the eye-opening thing that was its signature for all of our work, whether it's in North Korea or other places where people are not able to access freely the news and information or even the views or perspectives of their fellow countrymen and women. And to discuss those. And there's a lot of skepticism at first when they hear our broadcast, when they access our content and programming on the internet or social media, what have you. Could this really be true? But then people start to realize that there are things that jive, there are things that connect. Some of the kind of stereotypical programming and progress we do, reporting we do is more or less political. Really drilling down on politics that can't be discussed freely. But you'll find in some of our surveys that it's reporting about the weather, about things that are just really commonplace that people are not able to get, and they'll tune in to us just to get that type of work. So this fisherman's quote is really telling. Also, by the way, I was just thinking about this with the survey because a large degree of the people who left during this time of 2020 to 2023 came from boats using the sea, which was more and more common as the borders were security was intensified. And then, lastly, I want to get to the next slide, which is just kind of giving an overview about Radio Free Asia. And this is something consistent that we've seen through all of these surveys over the last, time immemorial. I mean, I think we've been doing them for almost 20 years, is really that we typically come up as the top in these groups. I mean, they're self-selected, they're people who left the country, they're accessing our content. Again, it's not representative, but we see that we have the highest, close second is usually KBS. This thing, I want to just make one thing, one caveat about RFA having this great position is that KBS we found was a more regular basis by which people access the content than ours. But still, nonetheless, you see, as Martin was talking about, this thing just kind of blotted out and this forest removed. And what does that mean? When you don't have a means by which people can hold their government accountable, they can't find answers to the things that are basic in their lives, and as a result, lose that sense of empowerment. So with that, I'm going to close my remarks, and I really look forward to the discussion and the questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. I think we've heard a lot about the moral hazard of getting information into North Korea and the risks that North Koreans take in order to access that information. We know that they've passed laws that have increased the punishments for consuming foreign media, as well as for distributing foreign media, as well as crackdowns in the marketplaces, which were usually places where people were able to access these kinds of USBs and DVDs and things. So I think we're really looking forward to hearing from Hannah next and the work that she's doing and the ideas that she has about how do we do this going forward.
Hello, so I'm Hannah, so Linker Advocacy Fellow. I wanted to imagine waking up tomorrow in a place without the internet, without access to outsider information. So only the news and stories the government permits. A place where people are executed for sharing foreign media and their families risk their lives just to stay in touch across borders. For 26 million people in North Korea, this is their reality. And 6 years ago, I was one of them. I was born in Hwaryong, a city in the northernmost part of North Korea near the Tuman River. Winters were brutal, and there were frequent shortages of fuel and electricity. My father was a high school physics teacher. He was quiet, loyal, and diligent. But despite his hard work and loyalty to the imagine the monthly rations he received were not enough for our family. So in order to survive, my mother began selling goods at the market. She wanted a better life for us. And that hope led her to the unthinkable, escaping North Korea. 3 times she tried. 3 times she was caught. And each time she was imprisoned and sent to a labor camp. The prison camp was a living hell. My mother saw women waste away from hunger and die from simple illnesses. I was just 13 when I first visited her carrying a bowl of rice. In North Korea, it forced families to provide for their present relatives. My mother had made a choice to save her family, but North Korea society saw as a criminal. My father, who had led a quiet life as a teacher, was denied opportunities at work. And our family was labeled as traitors. We were being punished, but I didn't understand why. That was the reality we faced in North Korea. In 2013, on her first attempt, my mother finally escaped and made it to South Korea. She worked tirelessly to send money back to the North Korea to help our family. She also slowly opened the window into another world. Using a smuggled Chinese cell phone, I was able to speak to my mother from time to time. And on our secret calls, she shared with me many things about the world outside North Korea. She also recognized the similarities between North and South Korea and its people, and reminded me that despite decades of division, we are still one people. I secretly began watching South Korean sitcoms. I never forget one called High Kick 3. In one episode, there was a story of a woman who fell into debt and was being chased by collectors. But what shocked me was that his family wasn't punished for it. In North Korea, if one person sins, the entire family is condemned. But this showed me that in South Korea, life could be different, and you were free to make your own choices. This realization changed me. Information, even in the form of a sitcom, was hope. And it was worth risking everything for. Meanwhile, I continued to face the obstacles in my day-to-day life. I had learned how to code and use software like Photoshop, and I dreamed of going to the university after graduation. But because my mother had to back it, I rejected. So I used my computer skills to find work as a photographer and photo editor. Hoping to advance my career, I volunteered for the Shock Brigade, a group sent to the manual labor at dangerous construction sites. Thinking it could be my way to a promotion, it wasn't. I was sent to the Samjeon district, a place known for its harsh winters. Demolished buildings in -40-degree weather without protective gear. Dust filled my lungs and sweat froze my clothes solid. My only relief was being able to sleep in a crumbling basement. When I returned, expecting the promotion I had been promised, my supervisor simply said, "Let's wait a little longer." That was the moment I understood my mother. She had risked her life to escape because she was after something more fundamental than a federal life. She wanted to live like a human being. In 2019, I made the same choice and escaped. With the help of Liberty in North Korea, I made it safely to South Korea and reunited with my mom. But freedom wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. In North Korea, my tech and computer skills had helped me survive. I had always thought that no matter where I go, as long as I have a computer, I'll be fine. But in South Korea, I struggled with something as simple as a new keyboard layout. In school, subjects like social studies felt boring because I had grown up in a completely different education system with distorted versions of history and philosophy. But eventually, I found my place in science. The formulas and equations in math and science were the constant, unchanging truths I could always count on. I decided to major in electrical engineering. But I was determined to stay ahead and not fall behind in our rapidly changing world. Now, my goal is to become an engineer who can help bridge North and South Korea's science and technology industries when the two countries are one again. More than ever, I see that information isn't just about knowledge and convenience, it's a lifeline. Without access to information, you can't see a way forward that alone build a future. And right now, the people I left behind are more corrupt than ever before. During the pandemic, North Korea closed its borders to an unprecedented extent. Soldiers along the borders had to shoot to kill the other for anyone trying to escape. Around 90% of the markets were forced to shut down, leaving families to starve. The UN reported that nearly half the population faced food insecurity, while the WHO rated North Korea's access to medical care as the lowest in the world. A few years ago, when my father became very sick, I was able to send him money for medical care. But most North Koreans don't have that chance. Without someone on the outside, they are not only cut off from resources and information, but freedom, hope itself. For many, their future depends on a lifeline from the outside world. Last year marked the 20th anniversary of the North Korean Human Rights Act. But its reauthorization has since been halted, directly impacting to the work of many NGOs who are working on this issue and sending critical information and resources into the country. We have an opportunity to be a lifeline for people inside the North Korea today, and to remind them that they have not been forgotten. With your support, we can rescue and support more North Korean refugees and can bring outside information and technology to people inside the country to empower them not only to see a way forward, but ultimately determine their own future. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing your story, and certainly, again, a sentiment I think that everyone in this room really resonates with in terms of the North Korean, trying to reach the North Korean people and the importance of continuing to try to reach the North Korean people and bring that information, access, and that hope to them. I invite questions. Again, if you're online listening, feel free to use the Q&A box or send in questions via the instructions on the live stream. In the room, we will take questions in a minute, but I wanted to start by asking Kyuri and Hannah especially. Both of you talked about watching South Korean dramas and stuff inside North Korea and getting information inside North Korea. If you could share with us a little bit of how you actually accessed that information, what were the different forms that were available to you, and also what do you think would be useful for the people today?
북한에서 이렇게 한국 드라마나 외국 미디어를 접하셨다고 하셨는데 어떻게 접하셨는지, 어떤 방법으로 접하셨는지, 그리고 그러한 것들을 어떻게 보셨는지, 그리고 지금 현재 그런 어떠한 미디어가 들어가면 되게 유용할지 물어보셨어요.
저한테요? 아니면
다.
먼저 하실래요?
Thank you for listening my speech. 제가 미디어를 접했던 경로는 이제 USB를 통해서 시청했고 또는 스마트폰에 SD 카드를 이제 끼워서 보기도 했어요. 근데 경로는 사실 뭐 어디서 왔는지 정확히는 알 수 없지만 저는 사촌 오빠를 통해서 미디어를 접했습니다.
For me, I was able to get the foreign media through USB and also like SD card, and I would put it into my smartphone and I would access foreign media. And I'm not really exactly sure where they came from, but in my case, I got it from my older cousin.
그리고 어떻게 보는지 이제 물어보셨는데, 저는 이제 2019년에 탈북을 했고 그 이후로 이제 뉴스에서 어떤 이제 청소년들이 수갑을 차고 있는 뉴스를 보게 됐어요. 그냥 그들이 이제 뭐 한국 드라마나 어떤 외부 정보를 접했다는 이유만으로 총살을 당했고 또는 이제 수갑을 차고 있는 모습을 보게 됐는데 그때 굉장히 이제 충격을 받게 됐어요. 왜냐면은 이렇게 한국 드라마, 한국 K-팝, 이 K-팝 문화가 전 세계를 이렇게 유명해지고 있고 인기가 있는데 왜 그들만에게는 이런 조건이 주어지지 않고 그것만으로 이렇게 총살을 당해야 되지? 라는 생각을 갖게 됐어요.
So I came out in 2019, and I remember after I came out of North Korea, I remember watching on the news this young people in North Korea who were handcuffed, and also they were eventually executed. They were shot to death because they had accessed Korean media. And just because they had accessed Korean media, like Korean dramas and also K-pop, they were punished and they were executed. And I was very shocked that the K-pop is all over the world now. It's so trendy and so popular. And just because they wanted to access something that is so common in other parts of the world, that they had to face these consequences, it's very shocking to me.
그래서 저는 이제 북한에 만약에 정보를 보낼 수 있고 그렇게 어떠한 정보를 보내기 쉽냐라고 여쭤보시면은 저는 이제 제가 뭐 한국 드라마의 어떤 뭐 시트콤을 보면서 어떤 한 장면에서 한국을 떠올렸던 것처럼 또 다른 사람들은 뭐 라디오나 뉴스나 또는 북탈북민들이 하는 연설을 통해서도 이렇게 감명을 받았던 것처럼 다양한 폭넓은 정보들이 이제 들어갔으면 좋겠고 더기는 이제 또 한국과 북한은 아직도 역사적으로는 같은 역사를 갖고 있기 때문에 그런 연결고리를 이제 그들이 공감할 수 있는 그런 연결고리도 이제 포함된 정보들을 보내주고 싶어요.
You also asked me what I think would be useful to be sent into the country. I think as I was watching maybe like a scene of a South Korean sitcom, and that made me think about how life will be different in South Korea. I think, and also how North Korean people inside the country, when they access news items or maybe they hear defectors speaking on this issue outside of North Korea, and radio or whatever. I think just different types of information, just like a very wide range of information, if they could go in. And I think from different ways, people would be able to see access outside world from North Korea. And especially for South Korea, South and North Korea, they still are very much connected. They share a lot of similarities still. And for them to somehow connect them to South Korea through different ways, I think that would also be a good way for the North Korean to think about outside North Korea.
Thank you. Kiri, do you have any
네.
thoughts?
네, 저도 이제 친구들 통해서 USB를 같이 교환하면서 서로가 이제 드라마를 접하게 되었고요. 그리고 저는 이제 중국에서 직접 밀수된 TV를 사서 그걸로 주파수를 안테나를 연결해서 주파수 잡고 한국의 그런 송출되는 방송, KBS 방송, 네, SBS 방송 이 두 가지 채널을 시청했던 것 같아요. 그래서 거기에서 좀 짧게 할까요? 네.
And so I used to exchange USBs with my friends when I was in North Korea, and we would just share Korean dramas with each other. And I also bought a smuggled Chinese TV, and using that TV from China, I would get the Korean TV signals, and I would be able to access Korean broadcast channels like KBS or SBS. Those were the two channels that I was able to access.
네. 거기에서 이제 나오는 한국의 밥상 그리고 6시 내 고향, 남북의 창, 좀 이런 게 저한테는 대한민국에 대한 신뢰, 동경심을 좀 더 크게 심어줬던 계기가 됐었던 것 같아요.
And there are a few Korean shows that I was watching. It's about maybe there's one show about different regions and different rural regions in South Korea, and also another TV show that talked about North and South Korea, like differences and how defectors would come up and they would share their stories. And those shows helped me understand, also trust South Korea a little more.
네, 마지막 질문에 대해서 말씀드리면 저도 이제 북한에서 많은 친구들이 한국 드라마를 접한 거를 알고 있지만 대한민국에 대한 믿음이 어느 정도인지는 사람마다 다 다르다는 것을 좀 느끼게 됐던 것 같아요. 그래서 그래서 정보를 준다면 정말 이제 말씀하신 것처럼 다양한 정보가 필요하고 그리고 다양한 콘텐츠가 북한에 들어가는 게 필요하고 그리고 또 대한민국이 우리 북한 사람들을 어떻게 대해주는지 이 사실을 전혀 모르고 있어서 그런 거에 대한 사실 진실된 정보, 우리의 목소리를 그분들에게 들려주는 게 가장 저는 중요하다고 생각합니다.
So I do know of many friends and many people in North Korea, they still access South Korean dramas, but I don't know the extent of their trust towards South Korea that people will have. And I think, as Hannah mentioned, I think providing different types of information, different types of media, bringing it into North Korea, I think that would be really different because people react differently. And I think one thing that is really missing is North Korean people inside the country, they have no idea how North Korean defectors are treated outside of North Korea, and also especially in South Korea, how they are treated. So I think to also focus on the voices of defectors and how they are being treated, how they are living their life, I think that will be very important.
Thank you for that. I have one follow-up question, especially Hannah, for you. You know, there was a period in 2018 when there was, of course, the inter-Korean summit process going on, and President Lee Jae-myung had actually gone to North Korea, and And Kim Jong-un at that time had also hosted a K-pop exhibition in Pyongyang. And I wonder if you ever saw that or heard of that, like how well known was that in the country, and how did that shape your view about accessing South Korean information at that time?
네, 저는 2018년에 이제 북한에 있었기 때문에 그런 정상회담을 하는 거를 뉴스를 통해서 봤었고, 그리고 이제 공연을 했다라는 이제 소식은 들었지만 북한에서는 이제 공개적으로 방영은 하지 않았어요.
So I was in North Korea in 2018, and I do remember seeing it on the news that there was a summit that was happening, and also there was some kind of concert or some kind of performance that was happening, but they did not publicly broadcast it to the regular people, so I didn't get to see what actually they did.
하지만 저는 이제 저희 같이 일하는 사진관의 동료를 통해서 그 공연을 시청하게 됐는데요. 정말 그때 이제 소녀시대 서현 씨가 MC를 맡으셨는데 너무 드레스가 너무 예뻐서 어떻게 저런 드레스가 있을까 생각도 했고, 그리고 이제 또 나는 나비라는 노래를 불렀어요. 그때 그 윤도현 밴드도 공연을 했었는데 사실 굉장히 그때 봤을 때는 왜 이렇게 몸을 많이 움직일까? 뭐 정신없다라고 생각했지만 굉장히 이제 흥이 나고 에너지틱한 그런 에너지를 받았었던 적이 있어요.
So even though it wasn't publicly broadcasted, I actually got to watch it because somebody that worked in the photo studio with me, he somehow had access to it, so I was able to watch the performance. And I remember it was a person from a girl group called Girls' Generation, and she was emceeing the performance, and she was wearing this beautiful, gorgeous dress. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, what a gorgeous dress, and being really impressed about that. And there was another like a band, it's called Yoon Do-hyun Band, and they were also performing the song, I think it says, I'm a Butterfly. And I remember thinking like, they're moving so much on stage, they were just like moving their entire body. And I remember thinking, why are they moving their body so much? And being really confused, but at the same time, really enjoying the music and the beat.
Great, thanks. Why don't we take a question from the audience? And we do have a microphone. David, if you can introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hi, yes, Dave Maxwell, the Center for Asia Pacific Strategy, but also the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. I'm a board member there, so I thank you for your testimony today. And my first question is really for Jenny. A question of recommendation: will you publish their stories on 38 North? I think the world would benefit from that. You know, you said we hear a lot of stories. Their stories were powerful and would be great to publish them. I would certainly like to circulate them around the world, so I'd urge you to do that. My big question is, we talk about information and its importance, and I think intuitively we know information is good to get into North Korea. But what are we trying to achieve? What effects are we trying to achieve with information? And I think it's important from as outsiders, what are we trying to achieve? And then for Ms. Kong and Ms. Oh, what would you like information to do for the Korean people in the North? I think that's really important. And Rohit, just for you, what is the state of the network inside North Korea? Those contacts that we have, now that RFA is really suspended there, how are the people faring that RFA is connected to? Thank you.
So lots of questions there. And just to note on the publishing the stories, this video will be available online after this. It will be archived on the 38 North and Stimson websites and YouTube channels. And we do plan to do a sort of summary of this event as well. But Martin, do you want to start, maybe talk about like what is generally the goal of information access?
I can talk a little, yeah. I mean, of course, I'm not sending information in, so I don't have a objective with it. But if we look at the different broadcasters, I mean, some of them do have a definite objective. For example, there's a handful of Christian radio stations that broadcast into North Korea, and they have a very clear objective of spreading Christianity. Some of the radio stations, the South Korean radio stations that have gone off the air were broadcast by the intelligence service. So they have a more sort of subversive goal in mind in terms of sending stuff in. But I think the majority of stuff, especially when we looked at Rohit's graph there, showing the most popular radio stations and the ones that people are listening to. You had RFA, you had KBS, YBRT, which is the Chinese Korean language broadcaster. I can't remember what the other station was. But most of those are kind of general news and information broadcasters. I'll leave Rohit to talk specifically about RFA's mission. But I think it's generally to send people news, information, knowledge, education, the kinds of things that they can't get domestically, and to sort of open their eyes and ears to that sort of thing.
If I could just add real quick, I think it's worth acknowledging that different organizations, different governments that all have different goals in mind. And so it isn't one streamlined consensus campaign that's going on. But there are obviously a number of reasons, and we've heard from our speakers as well, the need for multiple types of information to supplement.
That's the key to accomplish what.
But again, I think it really depends on the organization itself and the information campaign that they have. So I get your point, but certainly it isn't just a one overarching goal for everything, but that each organization, each attempt, and everyone will get something different out of it. But I think it's also worth noting that this isn't a silver bullet here in terms of how effective it's going to be in doing a very specific kind of task. But Rohit, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit to that in terms of the intention. And we have had at Radio Free Asia, we have a mission, that is behind our creation. When Congress put us together in 1994, it was the enacting legislation. Terms like malign influence, disinformation were not buzzwords that were freely used, but that was kind of the impetus that time itself, that countering state propaganda and balancing that with objective, truthful news. And we've, this debate this year that you've been seeing kind of play out in the headlines, and as we are facing funding pressures and various things and uncertainty, has been about largely going to the idea that Radio Free Asia, RFA, has such an integral value, not just to the people of North Korea or other places that we go into, but as I probably mentioned earlier, about policyholders, policymakers, decision makers here in DC, people wanting to have an understanding. Our North Korean broadcasts and news and programming were cited I think 30 times in a State Department report in 2023. DOD and others come to us and ask about what we see on the ground. So this is very much, we don't like to think of ourselves as a soft power tool, all caps and that type of thing, but in effect that's what we actually are, and a very cost effective one. And there's kind of an inherent subversion in just by telling the news and doing this objective reporting, is that you're overturning a narrative that's being put forward by a regime that doesn't let other perspectives into fold. I remember Dan Sutherland, our executive editor and founding executive editor, came from the Washington Post. He was in Beijing in 1989 during the Tiananmen massacre, would sometimes have a gallows humor joke. I mean, kind of this thing that we don't pick our headlines, the dictators and despots do. And there's this idea that we creep in where there's that space. Creep is probably the wrong word, but we come in and see that as an opportunity. And by one that we suspect, and often we're right, that there are people who are on the ground in these places that want to have their voices heard, want to know more, and they want to help others getting that story being told, whether it's in Myanmar during the revolution, I'm thinking Saffron Revolution, many years ago, and getting that stuff through us and DVB and other networks, or in North Korea. right now, that's a really good question about what's happening to our sources on the ground, because that is something that we're really worried and concerned about losing, frankly. As we see a pullback, also in South Korea, there's been a pullback on a lot of other independent broadcasters and smaller outfits and such. It's about reaching people, but also people feeling that they can reach out to us. And that is a network we are worried we're going to lose right now. At any given time, I forgot to mention this earlier, our Korean service would have up to 25 defector or former North Korean residents on staff. And not all of them were involved in our investigative reporting, but quite a few of them were. And I mentioned the Squid Game story earlier. I remember because we've had sometimes issues about stories where we didn't call it right because of rumors that we couldn't verify. And in this instance, I remember going through with the editor and with the reporter that they had a contact in the security station at which a lot of these decisions were being made in North Korea. It was kind of phenomenal, and it's because of those defectors retaining those contacts and connections. And it's multi-porous. It goes through China with the refugee population that's in the border region. It goes through other places. It's not just a hotline into all these different provinces and such. But I mean, that's kind of what we really worry about losing. Again, not just losing a kick-ass U.S. network that punches above its weight, but losing those direct connections.
Okay.
저는 이제 정보를 북한에 보내주려고 하는 이유는 저의 이제 개인적인 생각으로는 북한에 살고 있는 모든 사람들이 자유라는 말을 해본 적도, 그리고 그게 없다는 건 알고 있지만 그게 정확히 어떤 의미인지, 자유를 가지면 어떤 권한을 행사할 수 있는지, 어떤 권리를 되찾을 수 있는지를 알지 못합니다.
So you asked us what we want people to do with the information that came from outside. In my personal opinion, I think people inside North Korea, they don't really talk about the word or concept of freedom much. They know that they don't have it, but they don't know what it would mean to actually have it and to use it, and what types of rights and what types of privileges it would be granted to people with freedom.
제가 가장 존경하는 이제 분 중에 한 분인데 북한에 아직 살고 계시고 저희 아버지는 이제 재혼을 하셔서 새 어머니가 계십니다. 근데 이제 그 어머니가 말씀하시기를 저에게 사람은 원래 악하지 않다. 근데 먹을 것이 부족하고 살아가기가 이렇게 힘드니까 사람들이 악해지고 있는 거다라고 말씀하신 적이 있어요.
There is this person that I respect the most, I admire the most in the world. It's my stepmother. So my father had remarried in North Korea, and the stepmother that we were living together, she once told me that people are not born evil, but because of the environment, because they're impoverished, and that's why they had to become, I guess, evil, or had to do bad things.
네, 그래서 제가 생각하는 이제 그런 자유, 제가 느꼈던 자유, 그리고 북한에 보내주고 싶은 정보들에는 이제 그런 자유를 그들이 스스로 선택할 수 있고, 예를 들면은 뭐 대통령을 본인들의 손으로 선택해서 그것들이 이제 정치나 이런 것들에 관여할 수 있다라는 그러한 이제 민주주의적인 이제 그런 것과, 그리고 또 다른 거는 이제 그들이 그런 정보들을 받았을 때 다른 나라들은 이렇게 하고 있는데 왜 어떤 게 문제인지, 또 다른 어떻게 하면은 더 잘 살아갈 수 있는지 스스로 생각하고 할 수 있는 그런 생각의 변화를 이제 기대하고 정보를 보내고 싶습니다.
And for them to have this type of freedom, and for them to even have the ability to elect their own president, elect their own leader, and knowing that they have that freedom and live in such a democratic environment, knowing that that is available for them to have the kind of information that other countries in the world have, that kind of freedom, and for them to have the ability to think on their own and to change their society on their own. That is the type of ability that will be granted to them.
네, 저도 개인적인 생각을 말씀드리면 북한의 청년들은 정보를 통해서 지금 현재 많이 변화되고 있었어요. 많이 변화됐고 실제로 한국을 너무 동경하고 있고 그렇지만 대한민국이 우리에 대해서 어떻게 생각하는지 이런 거에 대한 정확한 정보가 없어요. 대한민국은 너무 북한 사람들이랑 이렇게 만나고 싶어하고 통일을 원하고, 물론 안 원하시는 분들도 계시겠지만 인권을 위해서 이렇게 목소리를 내주시는데 그거를 몰라요. 그리고
In my personal opinion, the young people in North Korea, they have been changing a lot because of the outside information that was sent into the country. And they admire South Korea so much. But what they don't know and what they have no information on is how South Korea sees North Korean people, the defectors or the people inside North Korea. And they want to meet South Korean people and they want reunification. Of course, there are some people who might not want reunification, but they don't know that people are actually talking about North Korean human rights, that people are being vocal about it. That's what they're missing.
네, 저의 실례를 들어 말씀드리면 저는 드라마는 어디까지나 드라마구나. 제가 탈출을 할 때 거기에서 배 손주로 사업을 했었는데 친구들 중에서 갈만한 이제 배에 일하는 사람들 중에 한 명을 선택하고 그 한 명은 흔쾌히 가겠다고 했어요. 그 한 명은 라디오 방송을 접하고 대한민국에 대한 믿음이 있었어요. 그런데 다른 한 명은 드라마만 시청하고 그러다 보니까 대한민국은 너무 좋은데 제가 대한민국으로 가자라고 제안을 했을 때 저에게 뜻밖의 질문을 했어요. 왜? 대한민국 어떻게 믿고 가는데? 저는 그때 놀랐어요. 자유의 길이 낮고 이렇게 갈 수 있는 길이 선택할 여지가 생겼음에도 불구하고 대한민국에 대한 믿음이 없으니까 선택을 할 수가 없는 거예요. 그래서 정보가 굉장히 부족했구나. 나만 알고 있었구나, 이거를. 물론 다른 사람들도 알고 있었겠지만 나처럼 다 생각했었는데 그게 아니었다는 사실을 저는 그때 깨달았어요.
So I can give you an example from my own life. I now realize that Korean dramas they're just drama, fictionalized stories. Because when I was working as a captain or the ship owner, I wanted to go to South Korea with some of the friends that I had. And one person had access to South Korean radio, and they had heard things about South Korea. But the other person only had access to South Korean drama, TV shows. And when I asked that person, oh, would you like to go to South Korea with me? That person said, oh, why? Because I cannot trust South Korea because the only South Korea I've seen is through the Korean TV shows. So they couldn't really believe, they couldn't really fully trust South Korea. So that's when it really surprised me that even though they had a path to freedom to go to South Korea, because they didn't have a full information about what South Korea is going to be like, they couldn't make that choice. They couldn't make that option as their path. So I realized that there's not enough information for them to make that educated, choice for their life. And that's why bringing a lot of information, different types of information is important.
네, 저는 그래서 자유를 찾아서 이렇게 왔지만 자유를 얻은 건 너무 좋은데 항상 마음속에 무거운 짐처럼 마음이 그렇게 행복하진 않아요. 이유는 북한에서 지금 청년들이 억압받고 통제받는 게 너무 눈에 생생하고 제 친구들 너무 보고 싶어요. 대한민국엔 3만 4천 명 넘는 탈북민들이 와 있어요. 근데 다 가족이랑 떨어져 있고 어떻게 보면 추석에도 가야 할 곳이 어딘지 몰라 하고 가족이 너무 그리워요. 그래서 저는 바라는 게 북한에 있는 청년들이 현실을 깨닫고 거기에서 그냥 욕하면 욕 먹는 게 아니고 노력하고 우리만 노력해서는 저는 안 된다고 생각해요. 그래서 그 친구들도 같이 노력해서 나중에는 서로가 다 자유로워지는 게 저희 생각이고 목표입니다.
So I came out of North Korea seeking freedom, and I'm so happy that now that I have the freedom that I wanted, but I still have this big burden in my heart because I think about the young people inside North Korea and how they're still being so oppressed and living a very restrictive life, and I miss my friends so much. There are 34,000 North Korean defectors now in South Korea, but they all have been separated from their family members. And even during like major holidays, like we just celebrated Korean Chuseok, which is a fall festival or Thanksgiving, and they have nowhere to go, no families to visit. And my hope is that they would people inside North Korea, especially the young people, they will realize how things are in real life, and it's just not us outside of North Korea that have to make efforts. It's the people inside North Korea. They also have to do something about this. And as we all work together, I hope that we can all be free in the future.
Brilliant responses.
Yes.
Change, choice, and freedom.
Yeah. So we have a number of questions coming in online, and I know there's more questions here, so if we could kind of keep everything a little bit brief. We have about 15 minutes left. Just real quick, a quick question to Martin and Rohit. There are some questions here about what kind of information is being broadcast into North Korea. Are they getting outside information about COVID, about the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East? And then also, there's a question, Rohit, to you specifically about, what role do you think the Ministry of Unification in South Korea can play, given some of the difficulties that's happening in U.S. government-funded information campaigns? So maybe Martin, if you want to start, and then Rohit, and then we'll move on to questions in the room.
So what is being broadcasted at the moment is not very much because it's all been switched off. But in terms of the radio stations that were, and there are still a couple that are targeting North Korea, they're broadcasting programming for the North Korean people. So that means news about North Korea that the North Korean state media is not covering, but it also means general world news. So what's going on around the world. The other radio stations that North Koreans will have access to are the South Korean domestic radio stations. The big difference with those is that while they'll carry global news, they're really targeted at listeners in South Korea. So there'll be much more news of an interest to a South Korean audience. They're not really tailored for people in the North. They're perhaps not quite as interesting, but obviously a lot better than what they have access to.
Yeah, just very quickly, I mentioned RFA's mission and remit being kind of different than VOA's, separate from telling America's story, but focusing more on domestic issues. North Korea was kind of an exception because we found from our surveys that a lot of that information was not getting in. I didn't mention earlier about Russian and Chinese news, which are much more filtered in and also very controlled, especially about things like the Ukraine war. So we would always devote some news to kind of a digest type of regional, global, that sort of thing. You might have seen there was a story that came out earlier this year from Columbia Journalism Review about DPRK TV. This is something that we had worked on for many years with other governments in South Korea, and this gets to the question about the unification ministry in terms of political will bumping up against goodwill and funding and resources. This is something, the DPRK TV project is something that we had envisioned as having a digest-y type news type of thing, and then focusing a lot on people who had left the North to go to the South and rebuild a life, having like a reality TV style show that shows the trials, tribulations, but kind of a light touch, that type of thing, with other types of stories that we typically do, but not as focused on some of our radio broadcasts, which tend to kind of go into the difficulties and hardships kind of all the time, which survey has indicated that people were a little bit kind of like, oh, we wish you would have happier news sometimes, which, we're thinking about more and more how to do that. But with the ministry, comes into the issue of funding. And you might have seen some of the headlines about Radio Free Europe, commitments that are being made by the EU and other places to provide funding. I mean, these funds, our budget annually is $60 million, which is small in comparison to the budgets of, say, Voice of America or Radio Free Europe, for example, or the U.S. broadcasting. But I mean, it's still a lot of money, and I don't think, especially as governments are faced more and more with these kind of harder choices, putting more funding into their security and resources, which they've not been used to doing, suddenly giving that type of money to us. I think Radio Free Europe's commitment from the EU was about $6 million, which wouldn't even cover like 1 month. So, I mean, it's like, we are kind of looking at those types of things. If governments or others step up, if there's some way to, I think we can accept gifts, but we can't solicit for that, and we'd have to be very cautious if it comes from a government and that type of thing. but to kind of step in and fill in that gap. But we're also looking at if there's a future for RFA that, this budget of 60 million is very hypothetical. As I mentioned right now, 90% of our workforce isn't there. We're in the process of closing down assets. So, what our funding would look like could be, arguably less. We'd have to discuss that, but we're not expecting, something like just to kind of pick up where we are right now necessarily.
Sure. And obviously, RFA is more than just the North Korea service.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and take a question from the audience. Please, again, introduce yourself and make sure their question is short, because we're running a little short on time. Let's take Sean first.
Thanks, Jenny. And thank you for the panelists. I'm Sean, the CEO of Voice, a North Korean human rights group. I think we're speaking kind of, as often is the case, kind of in a vacuum of what's happening outside of these walls, particularly around the funding cuts, not just to RFA and VOA, but also to the State Department's federal assistance for those who are working on information projects. I guess the question is, if we are to make an argument to the Trump administration and to those within, what would be the argument, particularly around, given that all foreign assistance is now, aimed to make America safer and stronger, what would be the argument here? If you had an audience with President Trump, what would be the argument for, access to information in this current context of prioritizing America?
Any quick thoughts on this? Martin, you look like you're ready to say something.
I would say this kind of thing does make America stronger. For people that don't have access to freedom of speech, access to free information, getting access to it, as we've heard, can be life-changing. That is coming from the United States. Says a lot about the United States. Dave's question earlier about what's the point of these broadcasts? Access to information is a human right, and there doesn't necessarily need to be an underlying reason why we're doing it, except that we're just good people, and we have the ability to do this for people around the world. So I think in that respect, it could be seen to increase and it has over history. It's increased the image of the United States and of other countries that have broadcast these programs, not just to North Korea, but to people in repressive societies all over the world.
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah, quickly, I would just say that, this, speaking to what Martin just said, this is definitely something that puts the U.S. perspective first in terms of reaching into a population very directly. I used the term soft power earlier, and this is something that in a public diplomacy level, RFA kind of is the sharp stick of soft power. There's this idea that we reach in and connect with people, and it could bring, it overturns a narrative, often that's hostile. The argument gets easier to make with like China, for example, and the strategic competition or great power struggle. But you can also see it as bringing stability, to crucial places, whether it's in the South China Seas, as RFA has Vietnam and the Philippines through our Bernard News channel in its remit, or of course the Korean Peninsula as we talk about tariffs and trade and things like that. So there is a sense about stability where you can kind of bring down the volume of these kind of skewed narratives that are often used to drive differences and chasmic kind of holes between countries and their so-called rivals, kind of bring those temperatures down in some way if they're being overturned by our reporting.
Hannah or Curie, do you want to respond?
Yes. Okay. 저희가 이제 여기 펠로우로 온 이유도 있고 또는 또 링크에서 캠페인도 진행 중인데 지금 제가 스피치에서 언급했던 것처럼 북한 인권법이 지금 제정이 안 되고 있는 상황이고 그리고 이제 그 인권 대사도 임명이 안 돼서 이런 어떤 문제들이나 이런 것들을 이제 할 수 있는 권한을 가지신 분이 아직 이제 자리가 비어 있어서 이런 것들이 하루빨리 조금 됐으면 좋겠는 바람이 있고 또 그리고 가장 중요한 건 인포메이션을 이제 하루라도 빨리 그리고 계속 할 수 있게 이제 정부에서 지원이 됐으면 하는 바람이 있습니다.
So the reason why I'm participating in this Advocacy Fellows program through Liberty North Korea, and Liberty North Korea is actually currently doing a campaign to push for the reauthorization of the North Korean Human Rights Act, as I mentioned in my speech, and also for the appointment of a special envoy for the North Korean human rights. I'm hoping that somebody will be appointed as soon as possible because it has been vacant for a while, and more information will be sent into North Korea as soon as possible, just more and just different types of information, and sooner the better. Yeah, that's my hope.
I think if we could take one, can you do it real quick?
Yeah, can you real quick where I can just ask after and stuff?
If you have 30 seconds. Here's the microphone.
Grant Turner with the Stimson Center. I was wondering whether money, technical restraints, South Korea's domestic policies, or the lack of willing actors perhaps is the primary barrier to new broadcasters establishing themselves in the market, and if any foreign governments are also potentially filling the void left by Washington.
The quick answer is yes. All of that. But yeah.
I would say one of the issues is that South Korea and all of the radio signals are more easily received if they come from nearby. China, Japan, South Korea are all very restrictive broadcasting markets. It's very difficult for people just to get a license and put a radio station on the air. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the private broadcasters end up renting transmitters in places like Uzbekistan and sending it in over shortwave because they can't do it. One of the most valuable things that RFA and VOA had was they had time on this very, very powerful medium wave transmitter in Seoul. And in Jeju in South Korea, they could put a very strong signal in that other people couldn't.
Just quickly, I mean, commercially, it's not as incentivized for all the reasons that Martin was just talking about, and that is something that we ran into. Our signal, another aspect of our research was like, how does the signal come through? Is it clear? In many instances, it wasn't until we were able to access medium wave and AM radio style broadcasts that are at the border on South Korea side.
And I think going forward, too, there's also questions about how are North Koreans accessing information and where does radio fall into that in the future. But there's always more questions than there is time. So please join me in thanking all of our panelists for sharing their insights today. It's always great when we can have a panel about North Korea that also includes North Koreans in it. And we hope that you have enjoyed the program, and we hope to see you at future programming as well. Thank you.